Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to My World. And of course, we couldn't do it without the WWE Hall of Famer himself, Double J, Jeff Jarrett. Jeff, how are you, man?
Oh, Conrad Thompson. Yeah, we could do this episode without Double J. I think, well, let me say this. We're going to talk about my world in it, but man, there is a lot of stuff to dive into it. I don't want to get too far, but Daddy Buys Dallas. We probably need a little Jerry Jarrett, probably a little Erich, a little David Manning, Skandar Akbar and Bronco Lubitsch, if they were with us. Anyway, this is a fascinating story, but again, we won't get too far ahead. How you doing, pal? We got football season in full swing. Thankfully,
what are you talking about, Jeff? We're a handful of days away from Christmas. Can we talk about Christmas?
Oh, here we go. Ho, ho, ho. You want to talk about Christmas?
I do. I want to hear, do you have any good Christmas wrestling stories? You know, maybe not our generation. Like, I know you're old enough to be our dad, but
oh, here we go. Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, realistically, once upon a time, Christmas Day was maybe the number 2 biggest day of the year in the old territory days of wrestling. Do you have as a young fan, do you have a favorite Christmas wrestling story?
Well, dial right into Picture Money. Picture Money was always really good. It was the kickoff. It depended on where it fell that, we wrestled on Christmas Day. And in a perfect world, Christmas was on a Thursday or a Saturday because that's my hometown in Nashville. But as Christmas fell on Tuesday, that meant, okay, we got to jump in the car around 12 or 1 o'clock to make the Louisville show or Evansville. But it was always the kickoff of a highly profitable week. I mean, the WWE does it right now. They try to run the Garden right around Christmas and then run, obviously Raw, SmackDown. They run 2 shows a night, Toronto and Montreal, I think the last couple of years, and just big houses. They run LA during this week, big markets. There is the entertainment dollar is ready to be spent. Everybody saved or tried to save up for Christmas. They bought the presents. They've been around, and candidly, holidays are very stressful for a lot of folks. I'm sure you can relate to that.
Oh yeah.
I guess, oh man, a Christmas story. It was always wasn't always storyline driven, Conrad. It was the big event, a big battle royal, lots of guys on the card. But it was always sort of fun going in dressing rooms on Christmas Day that, the most of the world is with their biological family, I guess. And there's something about getting with your work family or your wrestling family on a Christmas Day, and you laugh and cut up and come to the event and go out, and the people are live and festive and good energy and good emotion. So I always actually enjoyed it. And it was something that I grew up as a kid. It's sort of what happened on Thanksgiving and Christmas. You went to work in the afternoon. You woke up, had Christmas, had a big Christmas breakfast, and then the show was going to be coming up.
As a kid, did you hop in the car with Dad and make some of those Christmas Day towns?
I did. You know, it probably didn't go on the road to a Memphis, Louisville, or Evansville, but if it was Nashville, yes, I was there. And always the day after Christmas. But see, I played basketball in high school, so
there's a tournament nearby, I'm sure.
That's it. I was dialed into that. But always, and you know, as I got in and started wearing my promoter cap, those early conversations at TNA, and I'm like, no, we need to run Christmas week. And Trifecta or Panda or some of the folks that were, I'll say, in the marketing department that were just new to the entertainment industry, they're like, are people going to buy tickets? And I'm like, watch, you'll be surprised. We don't want to run before Christmas in December, but we definitely will afterwards. That was always cool. And down at Orlando, the Universal Studios, they always had their Christmas parades daily. And when we were doing the tapings, backstage is where they would come and prep. And they had the big 2 or 3 other studios where they were doing hair and makeup and costuming. That was always fascinating. The Grinch and all that. So lots of fun wrestling behind the scenes stories through the years. Pretty cool though. Yeah, it's a different set of lenses looking at Christmas through the wrestling lens, so to speak.
How difficult was holiday travel? You know, you're working with Vince or you're working with WCW, and now there's all the airplane travel. You know, by car, it kind of is what it is. You can expect, you know, the roads, there's going to be more traffic. It's going to take a little longer, but occasionally you had to run into some really frustrating air travel. I think of wrestlers every time we watch that Thanksgiving movie, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, because there had to be so many of those moments over the years, right?
Well, it is. And if you've ever rented a car on Christmas Day, a lot of folks behind that counter, they're not exactly
tickled to be there.
You just say mildly, those kind of things. And at the hotel, but you know, there's some people that you can walk in the door and know, okay, they're going to make the best of it. They're happy to be here. They're enjoying work. And there's others that are like, this is the last place on earth they want to be. But checking in and out of hotels the week after Christmas, it's just something about this time of year. It really is. Between Christmas and New Year's, I can remember Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Me, Marty Jannetty, and a few others spent New Year's Eve. We did a show. This is 94, 93 or 4 in Pennsylvania. I mean, this is when WWF, I don't want to get too embellishing here on the rest of the stories, but we ran. It didn't matter. That's when we did 10 days on, 3 days off, 4 days on, 3 days off. And it was like clockwork. And the loop fell that, okay, I spent Thanksgiving one time in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with Kevin Nash at the Holiday Inn, and we had turkey dinner there. It's just, that was that grind. So where were we at Christmas this year? But there were always good houses that they made a lot of money, even from the picture day loop back in those days up to the WWF loops. Those were good payoffs and big houses and big arenas.
Well, we hope you guys have a great Christmas. I can't believe that it's finally here. I mean, it feels like 2021, as slow as it may have been, 2021 was really fast for me, Jeff. How about you?
Wow. Got a little time for election, Connie. I just continue to give you a Christmas gift week in, week out, being here with you, don't I? Is that what you like?
Every single week with you is a gift, and it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, the Four Horsemen, the Bullet Club, NWO. We could just go on and on. The gifts I continue. I throw you softball after softball after softball. But no, man.
You know the best gift you've given me lately, though. I made a trek up to Hendersonville with the wife a few weeks ago, and you said, Connie, let's go to breakfast. And you took me to a great breakfast spot, and I knew you would, but I kind of assumed at first it was a rib. What was the name of the restaurant you took me to for breakfast in Hendersonville, Tennessee?
Conrad, we are in the South.
It's true.
And at one time, Sumner County was very rural, but now it's a huge bedroom community. It's like it's just a suburb of Nashville, connected to Nashville. But nice little local spot called. You ready, folks? Conrad, if y'all can see the video version, he's already smiling because he's like, we pull into this restaurant and we're talking and chatting like we always do and all this. And he did a double take, but he waited till we got out of the car and we got right up under that sign. And Conrad goes, "You weren't kidding. The name of this place, it really is the Red Rooster."
We had breakfast at the Red Rooster Cafe in Hendersonville, and I just assumed that was some other business, like, I don't know, they monogram children's clothing or something. I don't know. But then when we really went in, I'm waiting on you to like crack a smile, like, oh, this is a joke. This is a rib. But no, it was damn good. So I was wrong. I stand corrected.
Delicious, right?
Best omelet I've ever had. How about that?
How about, and it won't be your last time there. I guarantee you that.
Oh, next time I'm up, I'm going to hit it up. But today we're talking about way back when, and you and I joked before we clicked record. We know somebody who is obsessed. I don't know that they want me to drop their name, but they are obsessed with this story and this era. Of course, we're talking about the supposed merger, if you will, between World Class and Memphis, and when Jerry Jarrett got involved in Dallas and the Von Erich business. And the result is, as you and I are talking, 77 pages of research.
The rib's on me now.
That is probably better suited for Mr. Jarrett, the other Mr. Jarrett.
That's right.
The Mr. Jarrett. And so you and I said, you know what? We're going to tell this story from your perspective to the best of our abilities. But I think this story, especially given the circumstances of just life, we should probably revisit this with maybe a world-class representative and maybe Mr. Jarrett and me and you, and let's just have a conversation. And I think we should try to make that happen sometime, maybe in the first quarter of next year. Just everybody get together, maybe at the Red Rooster.
And let's do it. Shut up cameras, roll tape. We can go from breakfast session to lunch session.
There's so much to talk about here. Before we jump into the meat of the story, we've got a lot of listeners to this program, Jeff, who really just grew up on Hulk Hogan and the glory days of the late 80s and the WWF. So they're familiar with you from the Attitude Era. They're familiar with you from WCW. They're familiar with you from TNA, of course. But when you talk about the old territory days, we do have a contingent of Memphis listeners, but today we're going to be talking about World Class. And I don't know that a lot of people really understand just how big the World Class business was, just how innovative Fritz had been, maybe how over the Von Erichs were. Can you just give some context to the reputation that territory had?
Ooh, let me think where to start. I'll tell you what. We'll start right into my world, because last week's episode of SuperClash, and I thought, maybe we should have done SuperClash after this episode. But in reality, SuperClash 3 that we went into granular detail on last week, it really crystallized to me in a lot of ways. That was December of 1988. And it was, I don't even want to call it a Hail Mary, because that's like actually a Hail Mary is in the end zone, like you're going to score, but it was a bomb to try to at least get a little offense going. But it was the last big collaborative event of the territory days. And it was WCCW, which we're going to discuss today, CWA, which is my family's promotion, and AWA, Vern Gagne's promotion. And those three, and when the My World social media team put together this collage, and I don't know if you saw it, Conrad, but there were a lot of legends, Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers on that card. Michael Hayes, Rikishi. I mean, I don't want to go through all of them here, but it was, a lot. But the headline of the card at SuperClash was Lawler, who arguably one of the at the very top of the territory megastars. You got to put Dusty in there. I think Bruno is obviously in there, but the Andre was never in a place for, he was in and out. New York was his home base, but he traveled all over the world. But as far as territory stars, Lawler and the Von Erich family, Fritz came in as a talent years and years and years ago, and then he became the owner and the promoter. And to put it in context, we ran Mid-South Coliseum, 12,000 seats, Louisville, 7,000 seats, Vern ran St. Paul and different deal, big size arenas. Sportatorium, the home base of tapings of WCCW. I'm going to get confused here, but it was 3,500, 4,000 seats. But the Metroplex Dallas, when I refer to Metroplex on this episode, that means the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the complete area. But I think the best example of how big WCCW was is to my knowledge, they're the first territory that had international syndication. Their product was seen all over the world. And B, they ran Texas Stadium where the Cowboys played, and they built it around arguably the greatest touring champion in history, Ric Flair. But the babyface local challenger was Kerry Von Erich, one of 5 brothers. And so talk about a family business in so many ways. But WCCW was a mega territory with lots of money. Paul Bash, basically down in Houston, and Blanchard in San Antonio, Tully's father. But Dallas and that whole area, some into Oklahoma, some in Louisiana, but their business was so good. Michael Hayes often tells the story when you get him talking about, they didn't have to get a hotel. They could leave their home and drive to town and be back, because that's how over the territory was and how red hot it was. But anyway, the Dallas territory, man, Conrad, I don't know really where to take it. I'm probably going to say that a couple of times during this podcast, because I literally could go on and get a little bit more granular and a little bit more granular and a little bit more. I'll stop there and let you tee up another question.
Get even more from the hottest new podcast going, My World with Jeff Jarrett, over at adfreeshows.com. Let me get granular here for a minute, folks. Not only can you get the entire My World episode library with 0 ads, new episodes come your way each week early, ad-free, and on video starting at just $9 a month. We've also got tons of exclusive My World bonus content waiting for you, plus unique interactive experiences with your old pal, Double J. You get to jump on and ask Jeff questions, and if you joined us in Chicago this year for Top Guy Weekend, you got to hang out the entire weekend. 100% the best value in all of wrestling. Strut on over to adfreeshows.com right now to sign up. Well, I just wanted people to understand that, this Von Erich story often gets told in a sad tone. And don't get me wrong, I understand the tragedy that befell the family, but boy, there was a whole bunch of success in front of that tragedy. And that's what I'm trying to convey. They were really innovative with their music packages, and boy, there's a guy behind the scenes there that did a lot of the video stuff for them that went on to do a lot of other stuff. And that fella pretty well, right?
You think that, and that's why, and I didn't even really get the answer out that you just asked. So prior to cable television territory, folks, for you new listeners, basically North America. So obviously that includes Canada. So the US and Canada was divided up into essentially 22 regions across the country. And you would think, oh, Texas is just one region. Well, not really. Houston had their promotion, San Antonio had their promotion, and Dallas had their promotion. But Fritz built his business based out of Dallas, and he was I'll call it a forerunner in building the modern day big production. The Sportatorium, like I said, only seated 3,500, but it looked really good on TV. It had basically in the round, but not a 360. What would that be? I think, about a 300. There wasn't people on one side. But anyway, a guy by the name of Keith Mitchell, a young Texan, started running camera for Fritz. And for the folks that don't know Keith is quick, down and dirty. He ran television production for WCCW. Then he went to a little bitty organization over in Atlanta called World Championship Wrestling, the Turner Group. So yes, WCW and every Nitro and every Thunder, essentially, Keith was with a team, but he was the producer of Nitros and Thunders and WCW pay-per-views. WCW got bought out Vince had his crew of Kevin Dunn. And so Keith, for a hiccup, was looking at different things. He got a call from his old buddy, Jeff Jarrett. And Keith did every Wednesday night pay-per-view, all of Impact, all of Explosion, all the pay-per-views. And Keith worked for Impact until he got a call from a guy named Tony Khan. And Keith, respect the hell out of him, love that man, love his family. But he left the right way at Impact and went over, and he has been producer at AEW from day one. So it all started in Fritz's territory.
Isn't that crazy? World class, world championship wrestling, TNA, AEW. Keith Mitchell has a story and a half.
Whoa, brother. Whoa, does he ever. But, you know, this era, me and Keith, especially obviously during the TNA days, you know, I would learn things about, no, you don't, because I was so young. I had no real context of the business going on, but Keith was involved with the Max Andrews and the Bob Van Gersey and Fritz, of course, and you name it. The Booker, the David Banning, Ken Mantell, Texas Stadium shows, international syndication. So Keith learned a boatload coming up through this time, but WCCW, the Dallas territory, was, and yes, Vince McMahon took over a huge business from his father and Gorilla Monsoon and others, but you know, the original USA time slot was out of Blanchard in San Antonio. A lot of early formative things that still have remnants today started out in Texas.
I want to mention the era we're about to talk about. And I guess our story starts really on Thanksgiving 1987.
Wow.
Buddy, there's a whole lot of businesses, the territory business. It's been turned upside down. Vince McMahon's national expansion, WrestleMania was the first major blow, I guess. But buddy, WrestleMania 3 changed the game. And Hulkamania and the hysteria surrounding WrestleMania and the World Wrestling Federation was at an all-time high. So by late 87, you know, Bill Watts is out. He sold to Jim Crockett. Jim Crockett's trying to make it work, but he's hemorrhaging cash. And now on Thanksgiving night, as the story goes, and this is from Skip Hollandsworth's The Fall of the House of Von Erich. He says, I've decided to get out and retire. Kevin and Kerry will still keep wrestling, but someone else is going to take over. I'm just tired. I've got to get out of the business. So, of course, the story here is the business is on its ass. And that's the story as you look around almost every territory, with the exception of Vince McMahon's WWF. If Vince's goal was to take on the world, by and large, he's won by late 87, has he not?
And again, I as I did all this research, and shout out to the researcher, because as I went through this, and I texted you a couple of times yesterday, and I started to text you about 5 other times, and I'm like, why am I going to bug him? He's got the same notes or part of the notes. It was a little bit overwhelming, because here's the analogy that popped in my brain a couple of times yesterday. I started Conrad, and I've been around the business my whole life, but I started in April of 86.
Yeah.
Is the fall of 87. So I am a year and a half in of the business. It's like a sophomore in college going into the bar exam as far as comprehension of, now, wait a minute. Hey, man, in 85, Dad, we were selling out in 84. And wait a minute. Yeah, I'm going to Japan, and just all the different moving parts. But you hear about, wait, Bob Geigel in Kansas, they're only running like how many shows a month now? Like, they were rolling up the carpet. Florida was rolling in the carpet. But wait, Fritz is going to step aside. And, you know, the first real chatter I heard out of that was like, wait, I understand guys no showing, but Kevin and Kerry own the territory. They're part owners of it. So wait. And then, you know, you just said the WrestleMania effect. It was, you know, at that time, the NWA, and it's funny in the notes, I had to like make sure that I understood, because nowadays when I think NWA, I think Billy Corrigan and his group, their group, but the NWA in Meltzer and Matt Watch, and you'll clarify a couple of this, the NWA back in those days, that meant Jim Crockett Promotions. And so some of the notes and going into it and really diving into it, it just was a very crystallization that I knew Tennessee was down, and like way down, comparatively speaking, from the prior couple of years before that. And then you hear Dallas is way down, and then Charlotte and the Crockett's are having a tough time, and their Great American Bashes, that summer. I think maybe Conrad, we can pull that, because I just wanted to pull some numbers yesterday, but man, terrible business in the territory was absolutely terrible. And people were losing their local TVs left and right. And most of the time when they lost the TV, Vince was getting it. That was a real changing of the guard.
And your dad was experiencing the dip as well.
Oh, from a live event perspective, because again, TV was not like it is today. And hey, Fox and Comcast and Warner Media, we're going to write you these big fat checks, and hey man, you're on prime time and Tuesday night.
Not only that, I mean, let's just be clear here. A lot of the area your dad's territory was in was socioeconomically depressed. And a lot of it was rural. So when you're rural, you gotta, unless you had one of them satellite dishes the size of a minivan, you got like 3 or 4 channels. I mean, at best. Yeah.
It was on Saturday mornings. The business model was simple. Get on TV on Saturday mornings free. You don't pay to get on. Every now and then you had to pay maybe like $100 or a small fee, but get on TV on Saturday morning. But you got to go make your money at the live events.
Yes.
You get your weekly episodic. That was the business model. Memphis was the only top 50 market. I think top 50. I think they were early, 30, 33, 34, 35 back in those days. Nashville, Louisville, and Evansville, I don't even think they weren't anywhere close to. And then those were our quote unquote big towns. Evansville, small. I mean, just really, really small areas, but very lucrative prior to cable television. Cable television. Now that's sort of the flag in the ground that our current listeners, unless you've older than Conrad, it's really hard to wrap your head around, because we're in the streaming world now. But prior to cable television, it's what came on those 4 or 5 channels every Saturday morning. If it's not cartoons, it's wrestling, and I'm going to watch it, and I'm not going to miss it. And that's where the success that my father and Lawler had with Memphis TV and bicycling the tape around, it still is staggering. The consistent ratings, even in these days that we're going to talk about, were good. It just shows you sort of the business they built, but creating live event revenue when people go, I'm going to watch once a quarter WrestleMania or whatever. I mean, yes, back to your comment, WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome changed the perception of the business forever.
From media buyers, from television buyers, from everything. They realized, wait a minute, this is a much bigger deal than we thought. This is worth a look. And they didn't mean wrestling. They meant WWF. And WWF became the brand from that point forward. But prior to that, as we were talking about the territory days, television really was like your infomercial for the live events. We're going to do that show for free for you, and nobody's going to get paid. But hopefully we can pique your interest enough that you'll come out to the town tonight and pay your $10 or what have you, and we'll sell enough tickets and we're off and running. Now, you mentioned them earlier. The rumor and innuendo was World Class had really taken a big dip because there were some issues with arrests and drugs and death and a lot of negativity. But just from a delivering on what you promised standpoint, a consumer confidence standpoint, there had been a reputation brewing that the Von Erichs were maybe less than reliable when it came to showing up for some of these shows they've been promoted on. Fair to say?
Very fair to say. And that is, again, my education in the industry that, my father, and gosh, let me back up. My grandmother and Buddy Wayne was a spot show promoter, and my grandfather was a spot show promoter. Like, we used to have window cards and posters, and they always wanted the full card to advertise 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks out. They hated for the opening match to be a no-show or a substitution. Main events, it's like taboo. Now today, it's almost common in so many ways. Card subject to change, all that kind of stuff. I mean, when we go to St. Louis, it will be jeffanderichlive.com, and Jeff and Erich are going to be there. But and I'm saying that in that substitutions back in the day, never, ever, you just did not do it. But Kevin and Kerry and Mike and David, it was as if, I mean, even the big shows, the TV tapings and you know, the getting in your car, drive 20 minutes to the arena at Sportatorium, they were missing those left and right. And that was, I heard that over and over and over starting around this time. Von Erichs don't make shows, which was just like, what? And I just remember the negative talk that I would hear from anybody who spoke of that their business model.
You know, there's an old saying in wrestling. Well, and that's before they killed the town. How might one kill a town, Jim?
Oh, okay. How might one kill a town? Advertise Conrad Thompson is one. Conrad. You gave a softball there. Okay. Killing towns, though, are substitutions. Like killing the town back in the day were at the very top is advertise the talent, not show. The other deal is have a really phony match. The other deal would be a bunch of non-finishes. So you don't give the people something to bite into. That'd probably be off the top of the three. Killing no shows.
That's what I wanted though. No shows is number one.
Oh, for sure. Phony work and bad finishes consistently will kill a town. So I was told.
But no shows is what killed world class more than anything, in your opinion.
Yes.
And it doesn't help that all of a sudden, when you're having this negative publicity with the arrests and the deaths and the drugs, and you've got no shows, and you've got Vince McMahon taking over the world, it spells disaster for this territory, does it not?
And that was something that when I got up to speed as much as a 20-year-old I could, when I was like, wow, because again, you know, knowing that, you know, just these little stories that I used to, you know, back there, prior, this is no emails and phone calls didn't work. I would take on the way to a town, Conrad, a yellow legal pad of, okay, this is Sparta, Tennessee. Here's the card. Here's the sponsor. Here is Hohenwald, you know, I'm giving small little towns. Here's Providence, Kentucky. Here's Russell Springs, Kentucky, whatever, these little bitty towns. But on a yellow legal pad, I would drop that off at the printer and it would have Lawler an opponent and Jeff Jarrett an opponent and Brickhouse Brown an opponent, whatever it may be, but it would have 5, 6, 7 matches or 4 matches. And at the bottom, it would be plus, you know, whatever, but you didn't even substitute anything on that card. It just was like taboo. And so to have a substitution in a WCCW card and it be a Von Erich, town killer.
Let's talk about the approach that a lot of these territories are taking now that Vince, they see their ticket sales dwindling because, as we mentioned, Bill White sees the writing on the wall and he's got a bunch of unpaid bills. So he's going to try to get out. Jim Ross helps him broker a deal to the Crockett's, but the Crockett's, they're seeing themselves losing market share. 87 is maybe top line gross, a bigger number than 86, but the profit is just not there. So they're trying to chase this market share as much as they can. And the race right now is syndication. And so the Crockett's purchased Watts, hoping to get past that magic number for syndication. I forget if the number was 100 stations or what have you, but the point is, in order to be a major player, profitability wise, you needed X number of affiliates, and the WWF had that. So Crockett thinks, hey, if I get Watts, maybe I can compete. The idea is people recognize we can't just do what we've done every other year. that is not working. And your dad flirts with that too. In early 88, it comes out that through the public records that are filed on March 25th, that he's going to be joining Steve Kern, Mike Graham, and Gordon Soley with maybe a new idea in Florida. Now, this episode is not about Florida. I'm not going to get too down the rabbit hole, but the idea is your dad knew, hey, if we're going to be viable and continue to achieve the profits we have in years past, we're going to have to do more. We can't just continue to do what we've been doing. We've got to try some new tricks. We've got to expand, right?
Yeah. And you know, the Florida reference and we'll go. So my father was sort of on the young end. Vince McMahon's younger than him, but other than Vince McMahon, because Vince took it from his father, it was Vince Sr., it was Jim Crockett Sr., it was Eddie Graham, it was Fritz von Erich, it was Don Owen, you know, all these guys. And so my dad was on the younger side of things, but he definitely knew, I'm not sure he had the plan, but he knew we've got to some way collectively, what you just said. And the syndication network is have one wrestling show and put it in 100 and something markets. And I think you're right, Conrad, either 80 or 100. And that's
somewhere in there. Yeah.
And that's how you could sell for the people that aren't completely aware. If you had 100 markets, you could sell a commercial and put it all of them. And there's some value there. You know, 10 markets, there's not a lot of value, but you can make some money, serious money. And there was serious money to be made coming up off syndication.
So let's pivot back and let's talk about Fritz deciding he wants to get out. Again, this is another quote from Skip Hollandsworth's The Fall of the House of Von Erich. Fritz was selling out his financial interest in the company that promoted his and his son's careers. He had decided to make only rare public appearances. There had been reports that poor ticket sales for matches over the last couple of years had financially hurt Fritz. He had spent a lot of money trying to uphold the family image. Ken Mantell, his old business partner, who had once left him in an angry split, was returning to run the wrestling promotion. Quote, Fritz is an old warrior, Doris said. He'd like to build the business back up himself and make his sons the most famous wrestlers in the country, but you can't have lost as much as he has without it doing something to you. He talks about never giving up, but you know, he's worked for so long. I think he's ready to sit out on the porch and watch the sunset. So that's what's written here. It's never been entirely clear how or even if Ken Mantell bought into the company or what, but there's been a suggestion that Alex Simpson or Sammy Cohen, the father of Steve and Sean Simpson, put up the money, but nothing close to concrete on that. Did you ever hear how Ken Mantell got involved in World Class?
And this is one of those deals that I was doing the research. I didn't know it then. I certainly don't now. And with all the conversations with Conrad, and I'm saying the shoot interviews and all the research, I'm sort of surprised that our researcher, I'm not bagging on him, although I will. No, it didn't come out. Why is that still a mystery? I'm sort of asking you. I wonder why that hasn't been uncovered to date on how that went about, because it really does add to this story on the opportunity that was presented from Kevin and Kerry to my father. I wonder what the Ken Mantell real story is.
The way it's presented here, I'm talking about Fritz for a moment. I think he just wants to go sit on the rocking chair on the front porch. Did you ever get that vibe from your dad? Do you remember there being a moment in time where your dad was always the serial entrepreneur, always positive? He's the optimist like you and I, but then eventually there's a point where everybody says, that's enough. Do you remember when that was for your dad, where he was like, okay, writing's on the wall, I'm out?
He's 79 and he is still rental properties. And I've got this. It's never going to happen ever. Now he may change addictions or job changes or whatever it may be, but never was, I'm going to go sit on the front porch now, because he played as hard as he worked. I'm going to take some time off, and hey, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to Florida. I'm going to buy this Hatteras boat. Okay. You're going to have it shipped back here to Old Hickory Lake. Oh no, I'm going to drive it back. Now, wait a minute. To drive it from the East Coast, you got to go down around the point of Florida all the way up the coast. At Tampa, you cut across over to Mississippi, essentially, and you come up the waterways. Who does that, Conrad? I mean, that's his nature. So no, he never said, I'm going to go sit on the front porch ever. And he won't.
Meltzer would freestyle in early 88 in the Observer. This week's word from another inside source is that Mantell owns 50% of the company and that Kevin and Kerry own 25% each, which I guess is a compromise to the two sides I've been hearing as to who controls what. Obviously, Fritz has a lot of power since they're building the promotion around him. The January 2nd show at the Sportatorium, the first ever Saturday night card with all the seats at $5 and beer was just 50 cents. Not only sold out, which is nearly 4,000 fans at the Sportatorium, but turned away another 1,000, and nobody could believe it. However, 2 days later in Fort Worth, they were back down to 350 fans. When I read that, Jeff, I just get exhausted thinking about how much of a rat race it is to be a promoter. I mean, there's really no time to celebrate and pat yourself on the back from a turnaway crowd of 1,000 if 2 days later you're at less than a tenth of where you were. It's crazy.
So as that reads, and look, you know, I'm gonna give our fiction / nonfiction writer, I'm kidding, Dave, I'm gonna give Dave a pat on the back because this is late 80s. Yep. No emails. This is phone calls.
Yeah.
Information, not the easiest thing. And so he's reporting on the day-to-day promotions, and Dallas, the Sportatorium, had a real branding of that's the wrestling spot. Well, 22 miles down the road in Fort Worth is a town that didn't get quite the prestige, didn't get quite the love, probably had maybe double the amount of no-shows from the Von Erichs. And so you're dealing from, you know, that to me, when I read that, I read it through a different lens. Was they had literally, and I remember walking into all this and talking to guys, oh no, Fort Worth's dead. That we have killed that town. And, you know, the Bronco Lubitches, the Frank Duseks, the Erich Embreys, Percy Pringle, which is Paul Bearer, you know, oh, no, don't Fort Worth. That is such scorched earth. They didn't use those words, but that was in that era that, like in this territory, Memphis was always really taken care of. It was Lawler's hometown, and Nashville was our hometown, and Louisville was a really, really profitable deal. So just sort of by the nature of the beast, we had a great TV station and a great time slot in Evansville, but it's a smaller market, and it was like fourth in our priority. And I kind of think that, you know, we would get Austin Idol to come in as an example. He would work Monday and Tuesday. I'm not going Wednesday. I got to get back to the beach. It always didn't get quite the love. And Fort Worth in the Metroplex area, although it's a major market, it had, like I said, more no-shows and not quite the love. And so with the business on its ass, they did the big special. Hey, and I don't know what the dates were. I think you said Saturday night. And I think Fort Worth was a Monday. Well, Mondays, let's get real. Folks are going back to work. They've burned us down there a couple of times. We're not going.
A week later, Dave would write, this week's ownership story is that Mantell only actually owns 30% of the company, and that the company has been restructured. And in the company contract, Mantell is the managing general partner, which means he calls all the shots. All I know is Fritz has called at least one shot. And one of the shots that's going to be called, according to the World Class Memories website, is that with TV sort of sucking hind teat and maybe it's lackluster, maybe we should institute something we've never done before, an open door policy. You see, the idea was back then, if you're going to be on TV and we're going to give you a push, et cetera, then we need you under contract. But there's no money in that. So nobody really wants to come in and sign a contract for a dead territory. But coming and working a few shots just to have some work on your way to the next spot, sure. So you start to get a lot of new talent that would just do pop buys. Robert Gibson, Ron Starr, Kendall William, Austin Idol, Pat Tanaka. They're all going to wrestle for world class at different points during this period. Where are you at on an open door policy? Does that have some merit to you? This forbidden door, I guess, is what it's called these days.
Yeah, but you know, so I mean, there's a time when Lawler didn't have any ownership in the Tennessee territory, And, you know, he was certainly worth it. And him and my dad sat down. We're not going to draw up a talent contract. You're going to get points in the company. And as time went along, he got more and more and more because of his value. So having guys under contract back in those days, it was just such a foreign concept that, no, you come to work. You know, even my first WWF contract, all it said was, hey, we promised to book you 10 times on TVs and we're going to pay you $150. Just the contractual evolution in this industry, it was essentially non-existent out there. But guys would come in, hey, I'm working Dallas, which meant I was working Dallas full time. And I think the read between the lines here was, we need to get some names, and we don't care if they work 1 show, 5 shows, or if they stay 3 months. We need talent. Because again, they were on their ass and they weren't running even consistently then. And the ones they were running consistently were big losers. Fritz's model, again, you know, my dad gets a lot of hate on and rained on, but he always paid guys off the house. Fritz, whether his ego or however it may be, he paid guys and took it out of his pocket often. And that put him down. That's where Doris is saying, Uncle, he wants to go sit on the front porch. I'll translate that. Fritz wants to quit losing money.
Of course he does. And now he's convinced Mantell that, hey, this is your big shot, your big opportunity. And which is why I don't think Ken probably, if he bought in, he probably didn't have to spend a bunch of money, because candidly, if you're going to buy into a business, what are you going to do? You're going to do a little due diligence. You're going to review the books, and you're going to see. So if I give you a bunch of money, I get my share of this thing I still am going to owe for, because this is a losing effort. Exactly. Nobody pays money to sign up for new bills. But this could be an opportunity for Ken to maybe pull the nose up and salvage this Von Erich name, and maybe set up Kevin and Kerry for something other than a bunch of bills and liabilities, because that's the way it was headed.
Sure.
Meltzer would frame it as, Mantell's in control of World Class, although from the reports I've heard, Kevin and Kerry each own approximately 1/3 of the company. From an office source, Southwest Sports, the parent company of World Class, was dissolved and a new corporation was formed, with Mantell buying into the new company and apparently given the power to run the company, although Kevin and Kerry own the majority of the stock. The idea being that the boys are going to own about 70% and Mantell's going to own 30%. That's where Meltzer lands on it. And he does say, Ken Mantell has done a good job of reviving a dead promotion, but there's still a lot of major problems facing him. And those who think he has a chance of being the number 2 promotion in the company, even with JCP's problems, are very premature. Just take this into consideration. Crockett does more business on a bad Saturday night than Mantell's company does in a week. And that tells the story, you know, even though things are down for Crockett, they're so much further down for World Class
and Tennessee and Byrne.
So the promotions start to work. And I think what they've got to do here, you heard the deal. All the tickets are $5, beer's 50 cents. They're going to run a show in Dallas on February 12th, and they're going to draw 3,800 fans, with the idea being, if you buy 1 ticket, you get the second deal for 1 cent. And they did the same concession deal. So if you bought a soda for regular price, you get a second one for a penny. We're trying to get creative to get fans to give us another chance. We've lost some consumer confidence, where I paid $10 to see the Von Erichs and now they weren't here. And by the time it happens a second or third time, they're not paying anymore, unless you do some of these pricing gimmicks where it's nearly free. Now, this is a dangerous game, because when you start to comp an entire town or paper a town, once you've shown me I can get it for free, I don't want to pay for it anymore. And I might not ever pay for it. But this really is a Hail Mary effort just to pull the nose up on consumer confidence that, hey, give us another shot. This is better than you remember. You know, that was then, this is now, you know, blah, blah, blah. Right. That's the only way this 1 penny concept or 50-cent beer concept ever works.
And I mean, just to pull back, and again, not to get all over this, and this is anyway, in Tennessee in May, when schools got out of kids got out of school, and in September when they went back, to keep our regulars engaged, hey, let's give them a little bit of a price break. and to keep them coming weekly, because we want them 52 weeks a year.
Yes.
But what you're really telling the consumer is, don't look at our wrestling card, because we know you're not going to buy that. We know you're not buying the title match or the emotion or the love story or the betrayal or the tag team championship. We want you to come out and enjoy. And it's a lot like minor league baseball, because you don't control the players. Hey, come have fun and entertainment. And that works. But in a wrestling episodic nature business, it doesn't work forever, not even close. And there becomes diminishing returns. And then, like you said, the papering effect is it's counterproductive in so many ways.
Let's talk about the big idea. One of the big ideas is we're going to bring Michael Hayes back in as a big baby face. We're going to try to do a concert for him on March 5th at the Sportatorium. Meltzer doesn't think Terry Gordy will be there because he'll be in Japan, but they're going to come up with something. And he says with Hayes coming back, he's going to be the assistant booker to Ken Mantell. Although at times Bill Irwin and or Erich Embry had been acting as bookers as well. Meltzer would say this: basically, this area has too many wrestlers and too many bookers for its gates to support. So some house cleaning is in order. So we're throwing everything at the wall and trying to see what sticks, right? Yep. We'll use every booker. We'll use every wrestler. We've just got to do something. And then this comes out. Meltzer says, in last week's issue, I noted a major story, and I'll never do that again without more details. The story is that Crockett has been in heavy negotiations over the past 10 days with Ken Mantell of World Class. I've heard several reports, some conflicting about it. I know Crockett was going in with the idea of taking over World Class, not buying into it, but a similar takeover to Florida and Central States, which would give him the valuable Channel 11 time slot on Saturday nights in Dallas, which is the highest rated pro wrestling show in any of the top 20 markets in the United States. To complete the deal, that would require the approval of Fritz von Erich, who still controls the majority interest of the World Class promotion. So if the deal were completed, Kevin and Kerry would be guaranteed a job and a push with the NWA. Although since Kevin and Kerry don't want to travel, the deal would be they would only work shows in the area. A few TV tapings and maybe St. Louis, where they both had their father and has good draws in the past. The bottom line here is that even though Michael Hayes and Ken Mantell are probably doing the most creative and best job of booking right now of anyone in the business, their business just isn't turning around. And perhaps the economic factor, which is out of their hands, may not allow the thing to turn around. I don't expect the deal to be made now, not at least until May. So Mantell and Hayes give themselves a chance to see if they can get the area going and promote a lucrative Texas stadium show on their own. So there's at least reports here in late March that, hey man, Crockett might buy it. Are you as a young performer, you know, making towns for your dad in Memphis and just the Tennessee territory, are you hearing, hey man, Crockett might buy World Class too? He just bought Watts. Were you thinking Crockett's going to be the next superpower when you hear that rumor? Or does that even make its way to your neck of the woods?
So here's what's interesting, that, you know, again, growing up around it, you hear, you know, there's some funny stories that Nick Gouda sold his territory 2-3 times and different promoters through the years. And so when you say Jim Crockett buying it, a lot of people are like, oh, they're going to buy the promotion. What are they really buying? Like, when
did you really get that though? When did that click for you? What are they really buying?
In the formative years of, now, what are they like? You know, I chuckle when I hear Kevin and Kerry don't want to travel. That sounds preposterous when guys will do a live event in London and on a Thursday and come back in the States or Saudi Arabia, fly halfway around the world and work Thursday in Saudi Arabia and Friday in Omaha, Nebraska doing SmackDown, you know, and Kevin and Kerry didn't want to travel back in those days. You know, I know it's completely two different worlds, but it's fascinating to hear Dave, you know, write that. But no, so what is WCW? What were they buying? It was really only one thing: Channel 11 contract, Channel 11 time slot. That was what was up, and that was what Crockett's wanted. That's what everybody wanted. Conrad, you're much better descriptor, but God, because you just quick with words. Can you explain what a superstation is? And everybody knows TBS is superstation, but Channel 11 was a early superstation. Go ahead.
It means they had a big stick. You know, radio stations will sometimes say, "Oh, we're 50,000 watts or we're 100,000 watts or whatever." But the bigger your quote unquote stick is, then the more coverage you've got. So, like Birmingham, for instance, here in Alabama, just south of Huntsville, hours from Birmingham, you can still see that program. And so, like the Huntsville stick, it carries over into Tennessee. So, the Dallas stick, buddy, you could see that.
Ooh.
For a long way into other states. And obviously Texas in and of itself is bigger than a lot of countries.
Yeah.
But let's put this in context where the business is. The March 25th Dallas card drew 1,700 as Iceman King Parsons would beat Kerry to win the world title. Then they canceled Fort Worth shows on March 28th and April 3rd, saying they're going to return on April 10th. The new policy will be to run Fort Worth every 3 or 4 weeks instead of weekly. Now, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal until you have the context of they have ran Fort Worth every week for decades. And now they're saying, not only we're not going to run it every week, we're going to come back like once a month. They're cutting production costs as much as they can. And the syndicated show is really going to be just like the main show because they just can't afford to continue to throw cash at this thing.
And one quick thing is talent working 5 days a week, now working 4 days a week. It's a big deal.
But they're paid on the houses. And I want to give this context here. World Class ran 3 shows in Mississippi in this era. $783 is the gate of one of those shows.
Okay, there you go. Massive loser. Fritz went out of his pocket to pay the talent.
Well, at this point, it's not Fritz.
Okay.
It's Mantell and I guess the other Von Erich boys. But the point is, they ran a show in Mississippi with travel, with a ring, with security, with local promotion costs and advertising costs, whatever that may have been, at least posters and some radio or something. And then we've got to pay talent. And everybody chops up their piece of $783.
Let's go average ticket price. I was almost going to say 10, then I went to 5. But if I went to 4, we're 200 people.
And you've got Kerry Von fucking Erich. I mean, seriously, what a star.
I know.
Let's get to the Observer in April. They say there are obviously problems here financially. They've cut way back on TV tapings. They've cut back to running Fort Worth every 3rd week. So they're continuing to cut and chisel. And it even says Central States is now working with World Class as far as importing some of the talent for its big shows. And by this point, World Class or Central States was really almost like leftovers from Jim Crockett. I mean, it's not, you don't have any mega stars. So yes, there's a talent trade, but it's really new faces. There's nobody who's going to be coming over who's like, oh, finally, so-and-so's here. Right.
And it's Kansas City. To my knowledge, I think they were maybe a couple of other TV markets, but it wasn't that, when they talk about the Central States 6-man tag champs, and Crockett and them acquired it eventually. And I don't know the timeline on it, but yeah, it wasn't anything left.
Here's where we start to have the rubber meet the road. The CWA talent trade with World Class, a deal put together by Jerry Jarrett, has taken over as booker with Jerry Lawler, was formally announced on TV on April 23rd, with them announcing that Terry Taylor, Chris Adams, Iceman King Parsons, Kevin and Kerry Von Erich, and Terry Gordy, along with Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts, would be in shortly. Since World Class has moved the Fort Worth shows to bi-weekly Sundays, it leaves Mondays open to come here on occasion, and the World Class guys all need more dates because the territory and the number of employees have too few dates and too many wrestlers. Thus, the guys are working 2 to 4 times a week, not making any money. Several of them will start on the May 2nd card in Memphis. There was no reaction from the TV fans to the announcement of any of the names, however. So let's talk about that. When you first hear, hey man, Freebirds, Von Erichs, mean, you got to be chomping at the bit. This is a lot of talent that now is going to be rubbing up against Memphis. And you think, man, maybe there's an opportunity for that to be a shot in our arm, or maybe I can work with some of these guys. That has to be exciting for a young performer to hear. But then when they make the announcement and it's almost crickets from the crowd, that has to make you question, oh shit, what's going to happen here? Right.
Well, let me pull back a little bit on this. Number one, getting that pay slip that Stone Cold stared at, and I told him it wasn't going to change.
Yeah.
But all kidding aside, you had Monday and Tuesday were our better paydays, not big paydays, but better than the rest of the week. So when I heard the beginning discussions were, so we keep running Monday and Tuesday, and we've got our TV, and we've got to figure that out. But we could run Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because those were our spot show towns. You know, our weeklies were Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and they had markets out there. So if we can work together and sort of create we called it, I don't know if we called it that, but for whatever reason, it came to my mind yesterday was like somewhat of a super crew that was going to work both territories, but we would have some folks that just work Tennessee and some that just work Texas. I was really fired up. Now, I don't remember the crickets in the Memphis studio, and why I don't put too much credence to that is in that it's WMC TV, that was a new studio, and the ring was set up, and they pulled up the elephant door, set the ring up, set 3 rows of literally benches, not bleachers, benches on 2 sides of the ring. People have seen the deal, but you had a floor director, you had a lot of moving parts. And when Lance and Dave would get up and have to make an announcement, we didn't have, you call it house audio. The feed was to the broadcast. And so you had to really be listening to Lance and Dave to get an announcement. And so I don't really particularly remember the crickets. I know that there was a really good buzz amongst all of us that, hey, new talent coming in, our territory's down on its ass. We need help. They need help. There was a feel good sense about it that it's going to help both sides, going to help both, help both territories. At this time, I had no idea where my father was visualizing and thinking about taking the business.
What did you think of Iceman King Parsons as a world champion? I mean, promotionally, hey, it gives somebody for the Von Erichs to feud with or chase or whatever. You can also put your feather in your cap about saying, hey, he's the first ever black world heavyweight champion. If you even consider world class, the ability to anoint someone that. But Meltzer would say he thought that was a mistake. What say you?
Iceman had we talked a couple of weeks ago about charisma, or I did that on maybe an ad free, I think, the it factor. I thought Iceman had an aura about him, a good dynamic performer. In those days, I didn't put it in the context whether this guy should be a champion or not champion, because I didn't look at world class as a world promotion. Me being in the business, I looked at that NWA belt that toured, and then all of a sudden the company champion was Hulkamaniac and, Hulk Hogan and his opponents. I didn't really look at WCCW from a world champion, but I thought Iceman was a really, really good heel. He could talk, he could work, and he had good promos. And I thought he had really good timing in the ring on when to give the babyface a comeback.
Let's also mention that the card here on May 2nd in Memphis draws $15,000. And Meltzer would say he was told there was very little reaction to the world class guys, but something was working, because this gate of $15,000, Meltzer was told, is more than double what they did the week before. So there's at least some interest here. And it comes out that Ken Mantell actually sent a letter to every promotion except Crockett and McMahon, offering to work with them to try to do tie-in promotions, provide talent for their cards. He's doing whatever he can to rent his guys out. And Meltzer's not sure that there's going to be a ton of takers on that, simply because if they're just coming in for a one-off, you couldn't really do an angle and a whole feud and really draw money with it. But it does show that they're willing to do whatever it takes to survive this thing, including, they're negotiating to become a part of the All-Star Wrestling television package. As far as the network ad package, they're looking for any sort of income they can get. And one of the ideas they have is Jerry Lawler working a title for title deal against Kerry Von Erich in Dallas, Memphis, and Kansas City. And that's in the Observer for May. And then a couple of weeks later, he would say there was going to be a unification world title match between the AWA and world class champs, Jerry Lawler and Kerry Von Erich. And he again says Dallas, Kansas City, and Memphis, with the idea being it's title versus title at the Sportatorium in June. And then in Kansas City the next week. But he says he can't confirm a date for a Memphis match. When do you first remember hearing about Lawler, Von Erich in a series of these unification matches? And did you think, hey man, that ought to do the trick?
Right during this whole time frame of Texas, and Kerry was the top babyface, and Lawler had, you know, since I became a fan, he was always chasing that elusive world title where there's going to be Jack Briscoe or Harley Race or Nick Bockwinkel becoming world champion and all that. But then when you hear, you know, he's going to beat Henning, and I always get these timelines confused, but I love the concept. I thought it was, oh, wow, unification, because, you know, back in those days, the boxing world, WBA champion, WBC champion, just all those different kind of, which I always thought was confusing, all the different belts. Again, right now in WWE and AEW, you know, there comes a point where, okay, what belt really means anything? But I thought, okay, I like the story. We're going to unify these titles. I thought there was something to it. And I'm going to go back on that Memphis gate number of 15,000. I can remember when it went under around 10 grand, it was like doomsday or long faces around the house. And a $15,000 house on a weekly, again, every week you're there plowing the ground, making money, and put it into context of $782 down in Mississippi, a couple hundred miles away. That, as bad as things were around the country, we were still, you can either say hanging on or just the foundation that Lawler and my old man had built. It's fascinating to go back and look at all this now, 30 years later, with the lenses, Conrad, that me and you have on the perspective and the different promotions, Ring of Honor up and down, TNA up and down, AEW up and down, WWE, you know, just how it all rolls. Interesting.
It would also be noted here that Erich Embry is taken over as booker with Skandar Akbar as his assistant booker. So Michael Hayes is out, but Meltzer thinks it's probably because Michael was frustrated more so than someone let him go. Erich Embry, not a name we've spent a lot of time talking about. What was your experience like with Erich?
So again, doing the research on this or reading the research, shall I say, I wish I could remember, and maybe one day we'll get a chance to ask Michael, because the first time I knew something was like, okay, this is more than chatter, because I would sit in that wrestling office and hear different phone calls. And a lot of stuff, it just was phone calls. It never went anywhere. But Michael in Memphis having the conversations that, yeah, it's on our ass. We need help. We need to do this, need to do that. You know, where's this going to take us? And, you know, Michael out as a booker, but still going to do some things as a talent, or is he finishing up? Is he going to WCW? All that kind of stuff. But Erich Embry was a guy that I had seen in Puerto Rico. And, you know, Erich is originally from Kentucky, but, you know, Puerto Rico and Texas is where he, I don't say mainly, but spent a lot of time. And I just remember my father, the first, maybe a couple of conversations, Erich's got a business head on him. I could just, he never came out and told me directly, but I could tell by the way my conversations with my father in regards to Erich, my dad had a lot of respect for Erich.
Let's keep it going here and keep up the story in the Observer. He corrects himself the next week and says, turns out Lawler will not wrestle Kerry Von Erich after all. He's going to wrestle Terry Taylor in Dallas and Oklahoma City. He's got a doubleheader on the 19th in both San Antonio and Mesquite against Iceman King Parsons. And things really start to go bad here on the issue of June 20th. So the June 20th, 1988 Observer, quote, I'm not sure the background of this, but something must be going awry in syndication. They lost television outlets in Houston, Miami, and Minneapolis in the last week alone. Those are major markets, obviously. And now it looks like it's time to panic. The Observer the following week would report the meeting in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport this past Thursday turned out to accomplish virtually nothing. Those at the meeting were Ken Mantell from World Class, Barry Owen from the Northwest, Eddie Gilbert and David Woods from Continental, Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett from the CWA, and Mike Shields representing Vern Gagne. All they agreed to do was not invade each other's territory and try to work together, but nothing concrete was ever discussed. By and large, it was considered a waste of time. And then what do you know? The following week, it's announced there were some plans for some co-ventures that were coming out of that meeting. Maybe they'd start some of that stuff in August. But before we can get there, the August 15th Observer would say another major item is that Ken Mantell, who had been running World Class Wrestling, has walked out of the company. And it's now being run by Kevin Von Erich with his mother, Doris Atkinson, being a fixture in the office. I don't need to tell anyone what happened the last time Kevin was in charge. I've heard no explanation what was led up to this, since Mantell had a sizable amount of money invested in the company and business had been slowly improving since he took during the winter. The only story revolves around problems with the Von Erichs. Supposedly, it was part of Mantell's deal that he can't compete as Wild West Wrestling. So him walking out and starting up his own group and competition seems to be out of the question as well. Some also feel that Mantell may return, although it's actually been 2 weeks since the blow up. 1 week later, Fritz Von Erich is back in the office of late, and the company is turning into a family-run operation once again. So Ken Mantell here does his best, tries to put his money where his mouth is, allegedly, has some of the best booking around. Everyone thinks it's phenomenal, but the profit's not there. Something happens. He throws his hands up. He's out of here. Did you ever hear what happened with Ken? What was your experience with Ken? It's not a name that modern wrestling fans even hear that often, but it does feel like, man, he was the last saving grace here once upon a time.
Well, again, we get the luxury of looking back on it, but this is a definitely precursor that someone's going to come in with a real business head on, and they're going to begin to turn things around. And Kevin is going to go, oh, okay. Yeah. I'll take it back. You've got it. I'll take it back, with no real concept on, Kevin, we're still losing money, and you want to come in and screw it up, but you also don't want to pay the bills. Just complete delusional mindset. But no, I didn't, Ken Mantell was gone before I actually got out there. As far as day-to-day dealings or business, and my dad had his dealings, but it was it was a mess in so many ways with the, again, we have the luxury of looking back on it, but what a disaster living in the moment during this time, hearing about it, like what? And Carrie and Jerry Lawler, and going to that meeting and reminiscing about all that. It was just, what a complete mess. And to your note on those losing those markets, a lot of folks, NBC, ABC, and CBS back in these days, this was before Fox really had branched out. So you had the big three, but you had about 6 channels in each market. And those 6 channels in each market didn't really have so much local news and all that. So they had to fill the hours, and wrestling would be filled, would be used, syndicating these programs around the country. But losing markets happened all the time because a program director would come in and just flip the switch and say, nope, wrestling off, and we'll take Andy Griffith reruns in this slot.
But it ain't a good sign for your promotion, that's for sure.
Oh, hell no.
Meltzer would say, even though Kevin Von Erich is officially the president of World Class, Frank Dusek and Skandar Akbar are basically running things. Ken Mantell appears to have disappeared off the face of the earth. And boy, he did it just in time. There's a note here that World Class has an advance of 12 tickets for a Hammond, Indiana card in early September. That's in the August 29th issue of Matt Watch. So they got to show 10 days or so after this. And the advanced ticket sales, 12, not 1,200, but one more than 11, one less than 13, 12.
in Hammond, Indiana. For those who aren't aware, that's a suburb of Chicago. That's a flight. That's a flight for the Von Erichs. They're not driving from Dallas to Chicago. That's
12 tickets, a dozen tickets.
Yes. But for them to even be running shows their syndication strength or lack thereof. But still, they were going to try to run a show out of the Chicago market, out of the Dallas territory. And so these are these formative years of the true transition of syndication to cable.
So it almost becomes like a little feud with Crockett, or so it seems. Steve Beverly and Matt Watch would write, in recent days, the Turner organization has had conversations with global and world-class companies as possible alternatives to the current Superstation weekend wrestling hours. On the surface, this looks like trading Coke for Yoo-Hoo. And if you look at either of those promotions on the surface value today, that's true. But what we're dealing with here is more than just groups battling to knock Jim Crockett off the block. It's a battle for a key factor in any promotion's success: television time. And in this instance, time on the most watched local television station in America. World Class, the AWA, and Memphis will run a joint show in the Omni on October 30th. World Class has already begun promoting on its show and on the recent Pro Wrestling This Week shows from Dallas that a Lawler-Carey title match will headline the card. So it does feel a little bit like it's going to be, we're trying to make it a 3-horse race. We'd like for it to be Vince, Crockett, and really us, everybody else. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, we know that Meltzer is going to announce that December 13th is the plan. SuperClash III. We just recently covered that. Be sure to check that in the archives. But go ahead.
It just popped back in my brain. I think during this time, and anybody listening out there, I think the little small footnote is that Omni situation or whatever it may be. And I'm asking, and we'll figure it out, but I believe we did this like recording of Kurt Hennig, and there was a bunch of us that went to Atlanta to record a song. Like, remember when Vince was doing his song and dance routine, and there's all kind of gifs about it. And Coco Beware and all that, but there was some kind of, anyway, the promotions, and I'll call it the territory, the last, Texas, Tennessee, and Vern, they were trying to collaborate on a number of projects. I need to dig that up. We did maybe that was Double J's, as our version of We Are the World. Oh my God. There's a Midnight Rocker story that is for one of our live shows that I'll tell, but not today.
I bet I understand, and I bet there's a hairbrush involved. On Monday, September 12th, this is directly from Matt Watch, Steve Beverly's newsletter. The TBS team is flying to Dallas with the hopes of closing the Crockett sale. Matt Watch is told by 3 sources that a deal is being struck between Crockett and Fritz von Erich. The details are sketchy, but insiders suggest the likely scenario would parallel Crockett's Florida deal of early '87. In this case, number 1, no money would be exchanged between JCP and World Class. Number 2, Crockett would assume the television network, particularly the prize Saturday night KTVT slot. And number 3, the Von Erichs and probably the Samoan SWAT team would be major world-class names retained by the NWA. Number 4, JCP would promote shows in Texas in which the Von Erichs would get a percentage of the gates. At press time, they still had no confirmation. Meanwhile, a TBS source told Matt Watch that things look, quote, real good for a sale by September 30th. The idea here is Crockett getting the world-class TV would break up the All-Pro Wrestling Network, which would hurt Memphis, the AWA, and Pro Wrestling This Week, as world-class 100-plus station lineup brings in most of their ad sales. However, Matt Watch was told the syndication rights are held by an entity other than the Von Erichs, and that could stand in the way of Crockett inheriting the new stations anyway. Of course, as we know, Turner wound up buying Crockett, and it was a done deal. But once upon a time, it looked like, hey, man, maybe Crockett's going to do a deal here, and he'll take over the TV, and maybe they'll run the Cotton Bowl on October 15th, and et cetera, et cetera. And then, what do you know? That deal's going to wind up closing. I think the consummation was in November, if I remember correctly, and Crockett is no more. Meltzer would say all negotiations between Crockett and Von Erich broke off this past week. Crockett was apparently looking for a deal in which he would take over world-class TV and basically take over the promotion and keep the Von Erichs and maybe one or two others, while Fritz was looking for a simple talent exchange. Kerry Von Erich is now officially in charge of the company, although the real office work would be done by Frank Dusek and Skandar Akbar, with Percy Pringle doing publicity. Buddy,
it's overload.
It's like hot potato with who's in power, who's in control. And I got to say, Jeff, I love me some pro wrestling, but when I hear this guy's in charge now, that guy's in charge, and this guy wants in and that guy wants in, but all the while they're losing money, I just wonder, why would any legitimate person want any part of this at all?
Great question. And I think you're pretty accurate. And I think you're actually describing that by default, Kevin became in charge. By default, Kerry came in charge. A guy with a logical business head on the shoulders, like a Ken Mantell, says, I'm going to run it. If I'm going to run it, I'm in control. But he never got the legal papers done correctly or whatever it was. And the minute Kevin and Kerry tried to step back in, it was a disaster. And Ken tapped out. It's just, God almighty. Ugh, complete mess, brother.
But the idea, I mean, let me just repeat this. And Lord, I want everybody to understand, I respect the Von Erichs and what they did. I know I've had a lot of fun on some of my other shows making fun of the claw hole, but that's really just to piss off Super Dave or Pond Water Dave, who was a huge, totally blew you up in Tampa.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody's been well established now.
Yes. Yeah. Top Guy Weekend. We got it. Yeah.
Anyway, he is a huge Von Erich fan. And so I give them hell on the podcast sometimes, but anybody I talk about who was coming through that territory in that era, dude, they were just bigger than life rock stars. And Kerry Von Erich, if you drew a pro wrestler, you would probably draw something that looks something like Kerry Von Erich. But this sentence doesn't make any sense. Kerry Von Erich is now officially in charge of the company. What? Like, this guy has a reputation for being a superior athlete, ... but also an addict, ... and also not a great business person. He just wants to be jacked and have fun and party and be a celebrity and be a star and perform and move on. But running a business, I don't know about that.
Conrad, again, I didn't meet them till I was 20 years old, and I certainly never worked for Fritz. And again, we only know what we know. We certainly don't know what we don't know. And I know that sounds silly to say, but I have often thought, when you look at that family dynamic, that, you hear tragic stories of a single mom of two. Doris and Fritz stayed married, ran a incredibly successful business. Fritz is no dummy. So he knew how to run business and had kids that were not just average talent. I mean, David, they say, were grooming to be a world champion. They were all, Kevin, a hell of an athlete. And this is definitely a prime example. Just because you're athletic doesn't mean you're a good businessman. But how did that happen? How? And I know the diseases of addiction is death jails and institutions as a result. But my God, when you just go back to your line, Kevin and Kerry Von Erich at different times were running the company. Who thought that was a good idea other than Fritz?
It's
just crazy to just, yeah. Fascinating how the story all weaves through.
And it happens on a weekly basis. Just 1 week later, this would be reported in the Observer. There's a lot of news on the horizon, but since I've been on the road most of the week, it's hard to separate the rumors from the reality. Rumor: Jerry Jarrett has bought 30% of World Class Wrestling. Fact: Jarrett has been in and out of Dallas of late and has been negotiating. Ken Mantell does own 30%, and I'm certain, since he's no longer involved in the World Class business, that he's willing to sell his shares. I don't know whether this deal has been made or not. My assumption is that Jarrett would be smart enough not to buy into this group unless he controlled 51% Thus, he had the decision-making power. Most feel he's negotiating to buy 51% of the company right now. World Class has gotten out of its building problems with the city over the sportatorium. The city will overlook the problems with the building as far as it being a fire hazard, as long as World Class agrees not to prepare any food on the premises. They have to sell prepackaged food. The city had given World Class until the end of the month to spend $40,000 on building improvements, or they would condemn the world famous sportatorium. So lots of rumor and innuendo. When did you first hear or know that your dad was going back and forth to Dallas trying to work out some sort of deal?
You know, from the Michael Hayes conversations to Lawler, you know, just locker room talk, and then sitting in the office or just being at home, just hearing the different kind of conversations. And I don't know how many trips my dad made out there, but I know he would go out and do his due diligence. He didn't use those terms. I learned it later, but he was going out to, you know, kick the tires on everything. And the consistent story that I heard, my world was, oh my God, they have absolutely killed this territory with just mismanagement across the board, and they are losing money on every show. And then he'd go into the conversations. Channel 11, the ratings, it's a 2-hour block. You know, we come from Memphis at 90 minutes, an hour around the rest of the territory. So a 2-hour block on Saturday nights that gets a hell of a number. And it is something that is the cornerstone of their syndication. Like, the guts of the business were like none other. An opportunity that, candidly, my father had never really had the opportunity to even kick the tires on. And so it was, they've run, and literally Frank Dusick, Erich Embry, I don't even want to name names. Literally everybody my dad talked to was, Kevin and Carrie have ran this thing in the ground. And it's like, wow. And, you know, the bad PR was politely discussed, you know, the passing of David. And that was, you know, it was just a really ugly scene, but they'd run the business in the ground, but the opportunity was there. It just.
A week later, Steve Beverly and Matt Watch would write, Jerry Jarrett has assumed control of World Class with his buyout of Ken Mantell shares. But some insiders say Jarrett is being pumped for his investment and is vulnerable to a future power play. I hope the Memphis promoter is too shrewd for that. Ken Mantell has reportedly regained use of the Wild West moniker as part of his sellout and is said to be plotting a restart in both Texas and California. Meltzer would say, the other major acquisition story of the week, besides Turner buying Crockett, involves Jerry Jarrett and World Class Wrestling. Once again, we've got two stories from the World Class side. And once again, I believe this to be the likely story, is that Jarrett purchased a minority percentage in the 30% range of the company, but is in charge of the company, and Erich Embry will be running the office for Jarrett. This is similar to the deal Ken Mantell had, and some are speculating it's the same basic premise, and it will wind up with the same result, that eventually the Von Erichs, since they own the majority interest, would be back in power. Anyway, the other version of the story is that Jarrett was hired by the Von Erichs to run the company, but for several reasons, that doesn't seem likely. Those who scoff at this story say Jarrett doesn't want people to know he's got the kind of money available that it would take to purchase 30% of World Class, because he often poor mouths the CWA boys about how bad business is and the like. In reality, one would think that with Jarrett in charge, if Jarrett puts his full interest in World Class, that he could turn the company around, given his track record as a booker has been generally on the positive side. So even with this acquisition, there's rumor and innuendo. The idea that your dad is hired by anyone is laughable. You know, he's going to be his own man. He's going to be an entrepreneur. There's no chance he's going to go report to Carrie and Kevin Von Erich. I just don't see that happening. I'm sure he probably felt some sort of kinship or whatever with Fritz, but Fritz wants out. So I don't see that as being all that likely. And of course, we know that he ultimately did become a minority owner, and ultimately Dave predicted it to a T. It's going to wind up with the Von Erichs. Second verse, same as the first. But when you first hear this, oh, he doesn't want anybody to think he can afford to buy in because he's paying his guys so little. That's been a knock on your dad forever. That maybe the first mistake that your dad made was when he had people over for some Christmas party or something to his new mansion. The idea being these guys are sleeping in their cars and eating raw potatoes or whatever you've heard from Stone Cold over the years. And then they pull up to your dad's, like, I don't know, 20,000 square foot mansion. And they're like, what the fuck? This is where our money's been going. So there is something to that thinking of, well, he wouldn't want them to know, but that just reads like, man, somebody's calling and sort of downloading Dave with the info, but boy, they got an axe to grind in the process with your dad. Do they not?
And it's, my dad didn't give two shits about Dave Meltzer or any of the sheet writers. And if any talent, anybody would ever say, well, I'm not getting paid enough, my father in a minute would put out a legal pad and say, come here. We're going to do this. Okay. I'm going to show you the formula that has kept me in business. And I'm going to show a formula that doesn't keep somebody in the business. So if you want to be around here, let me walk you through it and give you you're going to get paid on what you draw. Now we're all in this together, but I don't really see the mentality of me losing to pay you. It don't work. The math don't work for longevity. Now you can do that for a little while, but Fritz finally tapped out on that and others tapped on that. But my dad was always adamant. You get paid off the house. It's the only business model that works in this business. So, I mean, and look, Dave and others, everybody used to. Now here's a little catch-22 as well. When you get paid off the house, my dad many times wrote checks to pay rent, to pay talent, to pay taxes, to pay whatever. He still lost and the guys got their minimum. So then the next week, the house may be up $1,000 and all the talent goes, well, shit, I'm going to get more this week because there was 300 more people in the house or 200 more people, whatever. No. You this week, my dad just didn't lose money. Everybody broke even. You got your downside. So that whole narrative that continued to be perpetuated, I get it. It wasn't fun. And especially when Stone Cold and the modern transition and Taker and Dutch's famous line about, hell, Jerry, we ain't even on food. You ain't got to worry about us being on steroids. All those kind of things. I get it. But at the end of the day, during this specific time, my old man being asked to come out there, if they weren't asked, if they were running business and making money, they wouldn't have been calling him. And that's sort of the whole craziness of this whole story. They're the ones that came looking for him. And matter of fact, my dad told them no, or I'm not interested. And as negotiations go, but no, I'm not getting into this unless y'all get into this with some of your own skin. And the fact of the matter is, when the rubber met the road, they had no more skin to give.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what ifs in this story. That's a really interesting situation. Had Crockett taken over earlier.
Yeah.
And Max Andrews and the Von Erichs and Fritz just said, here, Jimmy Crockett, or whatever, or Bill Watts or whatever. At the end of the day, Kevin Von Erich wanted his cake. And he just, that old saying, one cake, eat it too. That wasn't a reality, but they really thought they could hold on to it. And they thought my dad was another sucker from Tennessee that we're just going to get some money out of him, but keep our territory.
Well, it didn't get off to the best start. Dave would write, Jerry Jarrett did not show for 2 scheduled meetings last week to finalize his purchase of Ken Mantell shares of World Class. Speculation is Jarrett is leery of jumping into a situation without majority control. And a key insider tells us Fritz Von Erich has now washed his hands of the group. And of course, a week later, snot thickens. A similar story to the TBS Crockett deal, but of much smaller proportions, was taking place this past week in Dallas, where negotiations between Jarrett and the Von Erichs over control of World Class were taking place. A deal was struck that would give Jarrett the majority interest in the company and keep Kevin and Kerry as minority stockholders. Apparently, the company was deep in debt, and the agreement would have required all three parties to put up operating capital to keep the business afloat, which was also agreed on. The stumbling block in the negotiations appeared to be just a formality last week, which was the Von Erichs' late attempt to change certain aspects of the deal, most specifically wanting a clause that would revert the controlling interest of the company back to them after a specified period of time. Jarrett balked at that clause because it would basically create another Ken Mantell situation where Jarrett would run the company temporarily, theoretically build it back up, hopefully anyway. And then if everything went right after a specified time, the Von Erichs would once again take over a healthy company. The truth is, the odds at this point would have been against Jarrett even turning it around, even though he does have extensive background in running a profitable territory. Anyway, the difference wasn't resolved as of last word I've received. And the word I received is the deal, if it wasn't signed by this past Friday, that they were going to drop all negotiations. Without a deal, World Class is on shakier ground than ever before. At the same time, World Class's key TV time slot in the home Dallas market, the 2-hour Saturday night block on Channel 11, is still one of the highest rated wrestling shows in any major market. But now it's in jeopardy because of the overdue bills. Channel 11 has already opened negotiations with the NWA, and a switch could take place in the near future. That switch would most likely be the final nail in the World Class coffin. I want to add context to Dallas here for a moment. Once upon a time, Jim Crockett uprooted from Charlotte, and he didn't go to Atlanta. He didn't stay where he had cut his teeth in the Carolinas. He moved to Dallas. And he did that because he was taking over Watts' old spot. And Watts had this big fancy lease on this big fancy office, and it was yet another set of bills. But still, Dallas has been almost like ground zero for wrestling, where whether you were Bill Watts or you were Jerry Jarrett or you were Vince McMahon or you were Jim Crockett, you wanted Dallas. It is a major market. And this Channel 11 is really the whole crux of the whole deal. And so any sort of interest that Crockett or McMahon or Jarrett had in World Class is almost secondary to, we want that 2-hour slot on this station, right?
Correct. And, it goes without saying, Dallas, Fort Worth, it is a 2-market town with a super station, a brand new, enormous airport that you can get anywhere in the world. It had so much upside. We're talking 80s oil money. Very, very, the economy was booming. And I learned more about that in years to come. But, Tyler to the east and Abilene out west, and just it was Waco in the south. Lots and lots of population, lots of people, lots of money. But you said it, the 2-hour prime time, or, 2-hour, it wasn't a Saturday morning slot. I'll say that. Saturday night slot on a super station, super, super valuable. And that's what they had. And the results of the revenue generated off that in the last prior 3 to 5 years, Texas Stadium show, Fort Worth, that was booming on Mondays for years and years and years, and Dallas on Fridays, and all the spot shows, and just a very lucrative business. But it was all, in modern day, as we both know, it all circled around, there is no Fox deal, in my opinion, with SmackDown on network, had Raw not been an ass kicker for 20 years.
Yeah, 20. For sure. You had to prove performance. Yeah.
Yes. And so it all centered, the 1-hour Poughkeepsie Raw shows that were done in the 90s, or the Manhattan Center, or whatever it may be. Those are the true foundation of the seeds that were sown way back when that Vince is reaping today.
Yeah, and there's no better example of that than AEW. I mean, AEW got a television rights deal, but not for a ton of money. They demonstrated some performance, and they got some more money, but still, it doesn't hold a candle to the WWE Fox deal, which, again, was all predicated, to your point, on decades of performance.
Yeah.
Well, once your dad says, nope, I'm out on that whole temporary control, and then once it's back up and running, y'all just get it back. Meltzer would write, well, Kerry called Jarrett the next morning and agreed to Jarrett's terms. And Jarrett now owns not 30%, but 60% interest in World Class Wrestling, while Kevin and Kerry control 20% each. All three were to put money up to help clear up the sizable debts the company had, mainly to the Sportatorium, the TV syndicators, and KTV-TV, which is Channel 11 in Dallas-Fort Worth. From all accounts, Jarrett has managed to save the key Channel 12 time slot, which the NWA was close to acquiring. By most accounts, the deal was a necessity to keep the world-class promotion in business, as the creditors were calling in the chips, so to speak. And it would have been touch and go for the company even to participate on this December 13th pay-per-view from Chicago. I just want to add the context here. Your dad is taking over controlling interest of World Class at the same time that Ted Turner has closed on his sale with Crockett. At the same time that Channel 11 is saying, Mr. Von Erich, if you don't pay this bill, we're going to cancel your contract and we're going to do business with Ted Turner's outfit. And oh, by the way, WrestleMania hysteria is still happening. And Vern Gagne is saying, I'll promote us a pay-per-view in Chicago called SuperClash III. This is all happening at the exact same time, Jeff. There's a lot of moving parts.
And Conrad, and I don't know if this is even a good, but just to have a little fun here. Have you ever heard your parents get into a little spat, and maybe Deborah is getting into a little territory that she might not is best to go down? And because I can remember my stepmom, Deborah, like, Jerry, why are you even doing this? You've already got more headaches than you've got enough here. Why are you even having these conversations? Because my old man, and he's dipping tobacco at this time, and he used to have, like a chain that Lawler would carry. Those chains, anyway, the collars and all that, because my dad used to take it and he would wrap it around one finger and then spin it back the other way. And this is when he's having a conversation about stuff that he's irritated and frustrated out. He's like, can you imagine these guys? Like, they don't want to put a clause in their contract that they have to make the towns. What? And okay, they want me to get it back on footing, but then they have the exercise the right to take the company back over after. Okay. And here was the kicker. Okay, guys, I'm willing to put 60% of the money, and you're going to have 20%, Kevin, and you're going to have 20%, Kerry. But you guys aren't going to put collectively your 40% to pay these bills that are
your dad had no part of. Yes.
Yeah, so I don't want that and
past due bills, old
we
bills.
Maybe get too granular, Conrad, but the picture you painted about everything happened at the same time. The craziness of the whole deal is Kevin and Kerry and company ran it in the ground. My old man, I guess he's considered an expert in this genre of business, and he's agreed to come out, and he's going to come on board, and they want to have all these demands against this guy, including, we're not going to put a penny up. You've got to come save us. And my old man says, you're not going to put anything up? Think about the insanity. And then I'd say that, and my stepmom is going, Jerry, why are you doing this?
Not only do am I not putting any money up, but I can't be punished if I don't show up. So not only am I not putting any money up, hell, I might not even show up, but I'm going to need my money.
It's just crazy. I mean, it is crazy. She can ever get into you and you, and she's probably giving you good advice, but you're like, no, honey, I got this. We're doing this. I won't touch that. I'm kidding. But it's just, I had a flashback of the dynamic of them, because in my dad's house, the office was on the opposite side, but we would go over there and we would have lunch or whatever. And he would start on his rant, spinning that chain and dipping his tobacco. And she would just go, honey, why are you doing this? Hush. I don't want to hear that.
The only time Megan ever said that with me is when I told her I was going to do another podcast. And she's like, another one? How many do you have? Do you need another one? What would this be? Like the seventh one? And I said, yes. And she said, with who? And I said, Jeff Jarrett. She said, he wasn't even a horseman.
Oh, flag on the play.
Here's the best part of this. While we were recording today, we'll take a sidebar and then we'll come back. I got a call from Richard, and I emailed him because I said, "Hey man, can't talk right now. Recording Jeff Jarrett. Call you after." And he replies, "Thank you. Who is Jeff Jarrett?" How about that? Thank you. Who is Jeff Jarrett? So he's taken it another step. You were not only a horseman, he's erased you from his memory.
Who is this person?
Richard Fleer.
Oh, you're Conrad.
I'll show you the email. He says, "Who is?"
You are lying.
I'm not.
You are you spliced the tape together last week. Madden did. One of you guys. You're lying.
I got an email right here.
I don't look.
He says, "Thank you. Who is JJ?"
Look, WikiLeaks. It's like you're manipulating.
Who is JJ? I mean, that's what he says.
Yeah.
Who is
why don't you go on Wikipedia right now?
I'll change it again.
Exactly. Y'all just want to create, shout out to EC3 and trying to control your narrative. Just preposterous.
Okay, here we go. Let's talk a little bit about just to show that Jarrett got the deal on virtually all of his own terms. There's a clause in the contract which states that the Von Erichs can be fired as wrestlers by the booker for missing dates or if their performance is subpar. Previous bookers had been powerless to deal with the Von Erichs. Now, I don't believe for a second that Jarrett bought World Class to dump Kerry, who's the most marketable wrestler in either of his two wrestling companies. One of Jarrett's first moves is to change the way the TV shows will be handled. Over the recent history of World Class, the 2-hour KTVT show has been taped the previous Monday in Fort Worth, although of late, with Fort Worth no longer running weekly, they'll have an all highlights show on occasion, and even tapings of the Friday night cards in Dallas would be shown 8 days later. The World Class syndicated show was generally taped bi-weekly, with the two shows taped at the Friday night cards at the Sportatorium, with an alternate Friday card not taped. The crowds in Fort Worth have been embarrassingly low, as small as 150 at times, which provided no heat nor atmosphere for TV, and eventually caused the promotion to run Fort Worth as little as once every 3 weeks. About 5 or 6 weeks back, the promotion got a sponsor and announced weekly cards were back in Fort Worth, and I was told they planned to give away thousands of tickets each week, that the sponsor would be taking care of expenses, and they just wanted fans in there to create heat and atmosphere. But somehow that fell through now in record time. The current plan is starting this coming weekend. The Channel 11 show will be taped from 10 a.m. on Saturday mornings for airing that Saturday night. Admission will be free, and the taping will be done from the Sportatorium. They will continue to run Friday night shows with admission charged at the Sportatorium. This is a real dangerous catch-22 proposition. Obviously, the Saturday cards are going to be like regular TV tapings, hyping only the Friday matches. To do it any other way would destroy paid attendance for the Friday night shows. However, a 2-hour format of nothing but squashes would have a negative effect on the TV ratings, and frankly, after the novelty wore off, it would be difficult to get fans to show up, even for free, on Saturday mornings for a television taping. Ironically, it appears Jarrett is going to run a promotion versus promotion feud as his main attraction in both of his markets, with the roles reversed, of course. Someone compared this to the old days of the roller derby, where the Bay Bombers, Pioneers, and Chiefs would alternate between baby faces and heels depending on which market they were playing in. Of course, the derby did go out of business in 2 years when they started that format. The first Channel 11 show with Jarrett in charge saw nearly half of the show devoted to footage from Memphis, where the world-class wrestlers were the heels, and Mark Lawrence on commentary tried to get everyone in Tennessee, from Lance Russell to Eddie Marlin to all the Memphis baby faces, over to this Dallas market as heels. So this is an interesting idea, and we're actually going to sunset the conversation here in just a moment, because I think that sort of tells the story of how your dad took over Memphis. But I really want to get it from your perspective here, because now you can look back with the benefit of hindsight as not only the guy you were then, a guy who's, 2 years into the business, but now you've got one of the boys and a promoter and everything in between. Would you have done this deal? if you were your dad, with the benefit of hindsight, now we know it didn't work out, but we know what World Class once was. We know what that channel was. As you sit right now, as Jeff Jarrett in 2021, if you were in your dad's shoes back then, you have categorized yourself as a delusional optimist. Would you have done this deal?
Conrad, obviously I have the luxury of knowing the paychecks that came out of this and the heartaches and the headaches and the evolution of the industry. But, and this may or may not be interpreted the right way, but when I look at the history of the Jarretts in the industry, from my grandmother starting to sell tickets, a woman in a man's world, and working her way up and seeing those scratch notes that Jack Pfeffer read about her that she was going to kill him. And then my dad getting in the business and booking for Roy Welch and everything that went with that. And then getting into the promotional fight, and Vince, Nick Goulas lying to him and not all this, and him and Lawler break off, and that promotional, which is another fascinating, but I know it goes way back in time. But to see in WrestleMania launched in '83, and so now here we are 5 years later, the industry was radically changing, and Crockett, all this, it's like, not only would I have made the same decision, hopefully the same decision, but not only would I have done it, but I kind of look back with a lot of sense of pride that he took a calculated risk, stuck to his guns, wasn't a money mark. Yeah, he had the money to go out and bail those guys out, but he wasn't going to do it for, hey, I get to go promote on Channel 11. I get to be partners with the Von Erichs. There's a lot of things my dad is. One of them is he's not so much a mark to the wrestling business and just getting in business. So when I look at the syndication and it was yes, I'd have done it. And it's pretty cool to be a part of it. And I'll say this, I'm super grateful for the education, and we'll get into this as we move into the further episodes, the birth of USWA. Had this not have happened, this whole opportunity, and Michael Hayes getting involved, and Frank Dusek and Eric Embry, and the opportunity, and had Fritz not have wanted to bail on everything, and all the mismanagement and all the disaster, but all of that funk out of Channel 11, and later, Killer Tim Brooks is running promotions, and Mantell, and there's Chris Adams popping up, and all of this, and who knows where Stone Cold's career would have been had this not have happened. But I think my dad took a pile of chicken shit and he turned it into some chicken salad,
I did not see you coming around to chicken salad, and at the end.
But I mean, do you see where I'm coming from? I mean, look at what came out of this, and I really think it's a real simplistic. I mean, and again, we tried to do it some justice. The Von Erichs were wrestling royalty in Dallas in this time. And for my dad to say, you can be fired as a wrestler if you don't make towns.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty good business.
Let's follow up on this one piece, and then we'll save a little bit for next time. But
well, I think the next episode, when you get to it, Conrad, it's really USWA is born.
Oh, for sure. But I guess what I wanted to ask you is this concept that Meltzer's sort of freestyling as being, I don't know, questionable, iffy, suspect at best, maybe. The idea that in Dallas, we're going to make sure that they're booing the Memphis guys. And in Memphis, we're going to make sure they're booing the Dallas guys. The WWF did that brilliantly 10 years after this with Bret Hart in Canada and America. I mean, he was so this is very doable and possible. And, all you're doing at the end of the day is you're talking about different hometowns, right? So everybody gets the hometown pop and all that jazz. I mean, that's all this is. We don't need to overthink this, but it is kind of a fun idea that your dad has of, hey, and I just can't unwrap my head around how few people and how dead this territory was at the time. And now your dad is diving in and trying to catch up old bills and all this jazz. It has to be because A, he knows he's got to expand in order to survive. B, Dallas is a whole nother world from Memphis. It would be a new territory. It is a super station. It is a way to compete, not necessarily compete, but just stick a flag in the ground and say, hey, this is mine. I get it, but I think it's an interesting strategy to show Memphis stuff in Dallas, as opposed to showing Memphis wrestlers coming into the Sportatorium. We're going to show Memphis footage in Dallas. Your dad, crazy like a fox, because worst case scenario, if this thing goes kaput, they've already seen it, they're familiar with it, and I can unask myself of these Von Erichs, and I can go back to this TV guy and say, howdy, folks, right?
And Conrad, one step further to that, you have to understand that business, I don't get too far down this rabbit hole, but Vince McMahon, if he's not one thing, he's a visionary. He has thought so far down the tracks. And I'm not saying he's always the first into the space. He always makes the space better and prepares it for the next step. My father went into WMC TV in an era where nobody got paid to be on TV. Matter of fact, Vince McMahon was running around the country saying, hey, this territory owner, you're on barter. I'll pay you $300 a week. What? You're going to pay us $250, $300 a week for this time slot? Yep. These TV station goes, okay, that's 25 grand in our pocket that we didn't get. So, and they got to sell the ads. So my old man went into Memphis TV years ago and said, we're the highest rated show and you're making a boatload of money off these spots. I want a little of that change. And so why couldn't he have done that to a 2-hour program in Dallas, which is also the cornerstone of the syndication? And on top of that, to put a safety valve on that, I'm going to put some Memphis content in there because I don't know where my partners are going with this. And oh yeah, they've scorched the earth out here with their bad business and no shows. So it's another, a chess piece on the table that he was thinking ahead.
I know we're gonna pause, but I just want to give 2 little nuggets to sort of hook you for the next story or the next piece of the story here. And by the way, we're going to publish the notes here for the show over at adfreeshows.com. We had some phenomenal help with research on this one. This was a labor of love for our guy, who I don't know that he wants us to shout him out, but greatly appreciate the support. But this is a story that's going to continue to evolve and get better. And by the way, we're only on page 15 of 77.
We're only on 15, Conrad?
Yes, sir. There's a lot more meat on the bone here.
Well, and we didn't even get into I think it's very applicable in today's world about branding. I mean, just the true branding of a promotion and in a lot of ways rebuilding a brand and doing a little patchwork here and there. And yeah, but man, if we're only on page 15 of this research, this is good. But it is a fascinating story. A precursor of a lot of things to come. I mean, we didn't even get into my Japan. Dave Meltzer gave me a nice compliment, but this was very early in my career, but there were some pivotal moments of the first time that I'd left my home territory full time. I moved out to Dallas and lived out in an apartment there. We'll get into that. The Japan story, the Wailing Jennings bus back and forth, Stone Cold and Chris Adams and the wives and that whole storyline, which got a lot of negative blowback. We got a lot of negative blowback, just like the Attitude Era did 10 years later. So Stone Cold, maybe this was his first controversial storyline, just a little precursor of what would be becoming 10 years later as Stone Cold Steve Austin. So a lot of meat on the bone in this story.
Let my family save your family some cash. You don't need perfect credit. You don't need money out of your pocket, but we will save you money. It's not a matter if, it's a matter of how much. savewithconrad.com. Two little notes here for the local. This is a report directly from the Observer. For the local tapings on Saturday AM, the pay scale is $15 for jobbers who lose, no pay for the guys who go over, and the wrestlers on the circuit will work $30 nightly guarantees for the bottom guys, which again shows they're operating to make a profit as a business. But now World Class is going to get a similar rep as Memphis for payoffs. Let's take it one step further. This is directly from the Matt Watch program 1 week later. Jerry Jarrett's early policy is that you have to work to be paid, and it's a good one. The first full week after Jarrett took over, Kevin Von Erich didn't draw a paycheck at all. I'm told that on the November 11th Dallas card, he must have gotten the message. Insiders say Kevin worked harder than he had in the last 2 years. Funny how the pocketbook has a way of making people perform in mysterious ways.
Oh, and to the listeners out there, Matt Watch was a regional version. Conrad's a nice way to proper way to say it. A regional version of the Observer, or I don't call it a regional. I mean, they reported, but they were I think they were Jackson, Tennessee based. I don't know, but anyway, Matt Watch and Observer, and there were some other. That's what I'm saying. The research on this came from a number of sources. Obviously, Dave was the main thread, but. Yeah. Oh, Kevin. I remember several conversations that Embry would have with my father back in the days. You put on speakerphone and yeah, Kevin came to work at this show. That happened.
And we're not done. We got a lot more meat on the bone. We're going to be back soon with more My World. We're going to wrap up the year with an Ask Jeff Anything. If you've got a question for Jeff, we want you to drop it to us over on Twitter at My World Pod. And we'll be back after the first of the year. Before you know it, and we'll pick up some more of this USWA story, but buddy, next year is the 25th anniversary of a lot of big things in wrestling. Of course, 1997 is my favorite year in wrestling. It's the 25th anniversary of 1997. Of course, we'll also get to talk about 2002. We'll talk about 2012. We'll talk about 2017. And boy, that's a story and a half. I don't know what we can legally share. But then we could even go back and talk a little 92. There's something for everybody. And I'm looking forward to a big 2022 with you, man. But we really get things kicked off.
20-year anniversary of Impact, 2002.
How about that? June, right here in Huntsville.
There we go.
If you're thinking what I'm thinking and I'm thinking what you're thinking, we may have something special up our sleeve on that deal.
We're going to eat the Red Rooster at the Elephant Door at the Von Braun Civic Center.
I'm not mad at it, but I thought here locally, you'd rather have some G's Country Kitchen.
I would.
We'll draw straws, but listen, folks, we've had a lot of fun here today, and I can't wait for us to talk more about this whole USWA thing. But now we've got the context of how it all happened, and we've set the stage for some tremendous storytelling. And maybe we'll even have some guests for parts 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And I think we need to get your dad's take on some of this, and maybe we need some USWA influence. And it's going to be a fun trip down memory lane, 2022 here. And we get 2022 kicked off in style in St. Louis. It's going to be Saturday, January 29th at ericandjefflive.com. Of course, headliners are going to be listed first anytime you're trying to market. Everybody knows that. So ericandjefflive.com. It's a super show though. 83 weeks in My World together for the first time on stage. 2 live mics telling stories we can't tell here on the podcast. You might have some stories about famous dogs. You might have some stories about the Midnight Rockers. We've never really addressed the Dixie Carter stuff at all on this show, but we're not recording that show. You can sort of let it rip, Tater Chip, and so can Erich. You guys can spill the beans about the most recent runs with WWE, and you can finally fess up that you're opening a wrestling promotion. Everybody knows that in 2022. And there'll be a lot of stuff you can discuss, and you can ask any question you want over at the live show. It's happening January 29th in St. Louis. Tickets are on sale now at ericandjefflive.com. That's ericandjefflive.com. VIP, by the way, you get the best seats in the house, piece of swag you can't buy anywhere else, pictures with the guys, autographed 8x10s, and they'll sign any item of your choosing. By the way, the doors open for VIP at 2. The show starts at 3. We'll be done by 5. And you're just 2.4 miles away from the Royal Rumble. So you've got an hour and a half before the pre-show starts And who gives a rip about the pre-show? So technically you could walk there, dude. It's going to be a fun Saturday, January 29th at ericandjefflive.com. Is it not?
Jeff and Erich live.com, Jeff and Erich live.com. But you know what? I was just asked on my Ask Anything on the ad free. And then I've been asked a couple of times. I've done some media this past week. You know, I don't think me and Erich, when I think about like Bash at the Beach, him have never been in a room to have a freestyle conversation. I think that I think the original Dixie Carter, Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff, Jason Hervey conversation in Tampa before. That was like day one. That I think there's going to be, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I think there's going to be some pretty good, unique chemistry. I think gloves will be off, and jeffanderichlive.com will be I'm really looking forward to it as actually getting up on stage and that feeling of, hey man, we got a big show coming up.
It's going to happen sooner rather than later. Say you were there, make it an event. It's happening in St. Louis, January 29th, the day of the Royal Rumble. It's ericandjefflive.com. And hey, don't forget, you get all of our shows early and ad free, including all the notes, which, buddy, you want to actually thumb through these over at adfreeshows.com. But next week, man, we're just going to have a little ADD. We're going to be all over the place, man. You can ask Jeff anything. We'll probably hit 100 different topics next week. Ask your questions right now at My World Pod. And Jeff, I'm sure I'll talk to you before then, but I hope you and all of our listeners have a very Merry Christmas.
I hope all the My World, and I appreciate all the support this year. What a year it's been, man. Seriously, what a year it's been. And I love it. Appreciate it. Merry Christmas, everyone out there. Conrad, I'm not telling you Christmas right now. You've brought up some slanderous texts and emails from Mr. Fleer.
Richard Morgan Fleer said, who is JJ? I mean, I don't think he means JJ Dillon, the leader of the Four Horsemen. I think he means
God Almighty. It's so painful at times to put up with you, but anyhow.
We'll be back next week, boys and girls, right here on My World. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Ho, ho, ho.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at savewithconrad.com.